The second curator of classical art at the TMA, Dr. Pamela Russell, is unfortunately unable to join us in person today. She was at the museum for 3 years. She's a UPenn PhD. Russell continued her career at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, then Fitchburg Art Museum and the Mead Art Museum of Amherst College. She's now retired, studying the archaeology of northern Spain, where she resides, coincidentally, in Tampa's sister city of Lledo. She's here in spirit. Pamela has asked me to read her paper for you. Note that her remarks are written in the first person. So when I say I, imagine that Pamela is talking. Pamela assured me that during her time at the TMA, she relied on the enthusiasm and generosity of Bill for virtually all of the museum's endeavors. One notable project he spearheaded was the residency of photographer Len Prince. So from now on, I is Pam. First of all, I send my warmest greetings to everyone at the Tampa Museum of Art and those attending this special occasion. My thanks to Branko and his colleagues for organizing this event, and most of all, a big hello and fondest regards to today's remarkable honoree, Bill Zewadski. I had the privilege of following in Michael's footsteps when I became Tampa's second curator of classical art in '92, a sobering 30+ years ago. I shared a tiny basement office with the also new curator of contemporary art, Dr. Dreispoon, who now leads the Helen Frankenthaler Catalog Raisonné project and is chief curator emeritus at the Buffalo AKG Art Museum in New York. Doug and I appreciated the odd circumstances that we worked at the museum with only one curator of ancient and one of modern art. We may have been unusual office mates, but we were the best of colleagues. And Bill was a major source of support for both of us. He was generous with his advice, enthusiasm, time, and resources. He made things possible. Today, I want to remember one of the many projects he spearheaded and that demonstrates his range of passions and vision. He knew the work of photographer Len Prince, and Pamela honestly can't remember if it was his idea or Len Prince's, so we'll circle back to that, Bill. You can fill in the details. But Bill arranged that Len would come to Tampa and do a series of shots with models that would incorporate objects in the classical collection. Before showing you how successful this project was, I must take a moment to confess some of my initial apprehensions. A young, conscientious curator, I was very leery of extensively handling of the antiquities this project would require and worried that the object would somehow be devalued or trivialized if they became mere props in a photo shoot. I remember I expressed at least some of these reservations to my colleague Doug and the museum director at the time, Andy Maas. But with Bill's enthusiastic assurances of the care that it would take, that would be taken, and also how innovative and creative Len's approach would be, we agreed to go ahead. And I think the results were well worth it. I'd like to share some of my favorites with you, but I'd like to begin with a self-portrait of Len Prince taken in 1999. And I slipped in an additional portrait of a person who is well known to us. Len is well known as a photographer of celebrities, and I like to show a few more of these images to set the stage for the Tampa Museum project. Here's Faye Dunaway, Spike Lee, Kate Hudson, and everyone's favorite, Miss Piggy. I will briefly discuss 7 of the photographs Len created during his residency in 1992 at the Tampa Museum of Art, but there are many more to enjoy if you want to explore further. 3 of those I will show this afternoon include marble sculpture and 4 include pottery. A striking image to start with is this one that features Tampa's well-known statue of Poseidon or Neptune, part of the Joseph Veitch Noble Collection and the centerpiece of Seth Pefnik's 2014 exhibition, Poseidon and the Sea, Myth, Cult, and Daily Life. The 1st century CE statue is accompanied by the model David, who is coated in white to emulate the smooth, sensuous marble of Poseidon. Now it is more widely understood, however, that classical sculpture was painted with bright colors as the recent exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art Chroma, Ancient Sculpture in Color, has so beautifully demonstrated. In this photo, the two stark white male nude figures form a stately pair, bracketed by the curves of the dolphin and the rhythmic curves of Dave's left arm. Here is a shot with perhaps a little more action. Aphrodite, or Venus, missing her head and clad only in a thin, clingy drapery, is fondled by a woman with a man behind in the background. It's an appropriate image of the often playful goddess of love. This is a head of Athena, or Minerva. The image is more unsettling. If Aphrodite in the previous photo lacked her head, now we have only the head of the more cerebral goddess, Athena, of wisdom and war, identified here by her helmet. Darren seems to carry and almost lift the head, drawing attention to its physicality, its over life-size scale, and its intrinsic weight. The white hand of model David reaches under the chin of Darren, seemingly to pull his head off, like Athena's, causing Darren to cry out. This dramatic pose contrasts sharply with Athena's composed, serene expression, a stark contrast between mortal agony and immortal or inanimate transcendence. Len Prince chose to show this model only from the waist up, composing them almost as ancient busts and emphasizing the often fragmentary nature of classical sculpture as it survives today. After seeing how Len Prince paired his human models with the gods Poseidon, Aphrodite, and Athena, let's now look at how he incorporated the ancient painted pottery in Tampa's famed collection. In this photograph, Prince zeroes in on his model's hands. The cup depicts athletes seated at rest, grabbing his knee, echoing the grasps of the model's hand. The cup has one vertical and one horizontal handle, perhaps one for passing and one for drinking, and thus the joined hands evoke the sharing of wine at the Greek symposium or dinner party. Before wine was drunk from a cup, it would have been combined with water and flavorings in a mixing bowl called crater. Here the models hold a crater in quite an acrobatic pose. The crater, a 1986 gift to the museum from Mr. and Mrs. Zewadski, is from South Italy and dates to the latter part of the 5th century BCE. It depicts a Maenad and a satyr, followers of Dionysus, flanking one of those enigmatic monuments known as Hermes, or Hermes, where the head of the god Hermes is mounted on a pillar, embellished only with an erect phallus. If you'd like, you can go upstairs and see it with your own eyes. Herms were placed at borders and crossroads, as well as near temples and tombs as protective charms. On this bowl for wine, the connection with good luck, revelry, and most of all Dionysus is clear. The models too seem to be enjoying some revelry, as Darren jumps onto David from behind. Prince captures the playful and suggestive intertwining of their arms and legs. This is perhaps my favorite image of the series. Features a tall, ornate vessel from South Italy and two male models, again entwined. The vase is over 3 feet high and on its neck has an arresting female mask that stares out at us. The top register on the body shows an array of women at leisure, both seated and standing with their fans and cosmetics. The register below shows women collecting water at a fountain house, a chore that allowed them to leave the house and catch up on the current gossip. Between the registers is a row of carefully represented fish and other creatures of the sea. The shape is associated with weddings, as it could hold water for a bride's ritual bath. Yet it also has funeral connotations, since the shape was used to mark the grave of unmarried girls and women. The shape is known as Luthrophoros, which translates roughly as carrier of bathwater. To the right of the magnificent vessel are Prince's two models, in a dramatic, symmetrical, dance-like pose. Here, as in many of the other images, their skin tones contrast sharply, setting each body off from the other. I am reminded of the two main Greek methods of depicting pottery, the so-called red figure and black figure. Each relies on the sharp silhouette of the body's form against a contrasting background for legibility of the scene. Here David, perhaps even artificially whitened as he was in the first image with Poseidon, stands against the dark background of the image, and Darren's form is highlighted in the foreground against his partner's lighter body. In most of his images, Prince relies on silhouette and juxtaposition to construct his dramatic compositions, in much the same way as the Greek painter manipulated his human figures on the curving surfaces of this pot. To be sure, the careful lighting in Prince's photo also reveals the rich modeling of the model's anatomy, but I would argue much of his overall aesthetics is two-dimensional, given his choice of the monochromatic sepia tones and the flat, uniform backgrounds, be they dark or light. This photo, without human figures, is an exception. There is more of a sense of the Greek face with the tulips in space. We see the surface on which the face sits, as well as the drapery enlivening the background. I chuckle a bit to see this vessel from 350 BCE used as a flower vase or vase, when in fact its real purpose was again to mix wine, water, and spices. A punch bowl, if you will. And from a curator's perspective, this is among the most unnerving. One does not want water or organic material to come into contact with the antiquities. And if I remember correctly, we did indeed line the pot with ether foam sheets or something similar. Bill will have something to add on that little detail of how the museum's curators' worries were eased. The exuberant tulips, perhaps a little past their prime, are well suited to the flamboyant aesthetics of 4th century BCE South Italian vase painting, which some, but I think not Bill, see as somehow less than the height of the austere paintings of the 5th century BC from Athens. Bill appreciates, as many of us do, what a rich source South Italian vase painting is for mythology, ancient Greek drama and theater, and pure decorative exuberance, an appreciation he clearly shares with Len Prince. While preparing these remarks, I explored some of the more recent acquisitions of Len Prince's work and found this 1991 image entitled Buttocks with Vase. It is dated 1 year before his Tampa Museum project, so we can see he was expanding already on an existing theme. I'd like to conclude with some remarks on what it can mean when a contemporary artist explicitly incorporates images and themes from the classical past. On my recent trip to the States last month, I visited the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, where some of Tampa's classical curators have close ties. In part to see the important exhibition organized by Christine Condeleon, Making Past Present, Cy Twombly, which closed just on May 7th. This exhibition, much hailed by critics, juxtaposes antiquities, mainly from Boston's collection, with the many works Twombly created with classical themes and motives. Twombly has written, modern art isn't dislocated, but something with roots, tradition, continuity. For myself, the past is the source, for all art is vitally contemporary. As the organizers of the exhibition state, the exhibition looks at how Twombly absorbed its spirit, the feelings and ideas it filled with him, and sought to evoke it in his singular modern style. The Classical Now, Ancient Art in the Modern Imagination was a 2018 exhibition held at King's College in London. It had a more encompassing approach. This exhibition juxtaposed antiquities with the work of not just one, but 30 artists, including Pablo Picasso, Roy Lichtenstein, and Damien Hirst. The organizers explain ancient objects are usually exhibited with a view to their history, that is, about what they can tell us about the classical past. But these artifacts were not always ancient, they were once contemporary. By extension, museums and scholars can conspire to concentrate on the history of classical materials at the cost of their abiding presence. The reasonable concern to understand what the classical was can eclipse reflections about what it is and our continuing relationship with its legacy today. When used as inspiration for contemporary artists, ancient works are often stripped of many of their original meanings and contexts. The inspiration may primarily arise from the universal themes of love, death, and the human condition that classical works of art address and still resonate profoundly with modern audiences. Or perhaps a single aspect of the ancient objects is emphasized, whether it is the specific mythological subject matter depicted or the timeless beauty of its aesthetic form. But often many of the original associations of the ancient objects are neglected or unnoticed. For example, almost all of the Greek pottery Len Prince photographed probably had funerary functions originally. The vessels were buried with the dead in rock-cut chambers, never to be used in life again. The marble sculpture, probably originally brightly colored and created in Roman times as versions of Greek prototypes, would have been prestigious ornaments in wealthy homes, if not actually erected in temple compounds. I would argue, however, that antiquities are already stripped of much of their original meaning when put on display in traditional museum settings. We see them isolated in attractive cases in galleries, grouped by chronology or theme or form, the very attributes that resonate most strongly with contemporary artists. Only rarely, but perhaps increasingly attempted, do curators place primary importance on the original functions, find spots, or social roles of the objects on display. As the organizers of the London exhibition pointed out, there is no escaping the fact that the classical artifacts exists primarily in the world of today, and our response to them is filtered through the lens of our 21st century experience. And however distorting, it remains the only vantage points that we have. Len Prince treated the Tampa Antiquities as elegant, evocative expressions of a remote past, juxtaposed with living, vibrant nudes and ephemeral flowers of today. He used the arresting forms of ancient artists as counterpoints to the beautiful people he so artfully poses. The inanimate enters into a dialogue with the expressive language of bodies captured in motion. Millennia are compressed in his starkly dramatic images. Prince was remarkably prescient in bringing the past and present together for his Tampa Museum project over 30 years ago, in light of the strong interest in the topic today, as demonstrated by the recent exhibitions I referenced. And the impetus behind his landmark contribution to both classical and contemporary art was Bill Zewadski, the champion of this innovative endeavor. Thank you, Bill. Pamela can't answer questions for obvious reasons, but Bill, you can answer some of the questions she addressed. Was it you or Len who initiated the project? Come over.
Getting old. Len Prince had a dealer in Atlanta, Fay Gold, and she had championed his work there. And one of the things he had done was an African vase with flowers in it. And I thought that's just the thing to recontextualize our antiquity pottery. And so I invited him down. He brought an assistant and a whole station wagon full of equipment. And but he called me a few days before he got here and he says, Bill, is it okay if I bring some models? I had to ask him who's paying for them. But they all came at their own expense to be in the pictures, and there were 5 of them. David and Darren were boyfriends at the time, principal dancers of the Feld Ballet in New York. So they had the bodies and so forth. But getting ready for the shoot, they had buffed up. They had another one there bleached his hair so that he would look more like a sculpture. The one of David standing with the Poseidon had his body coated with plaster so that he would have the same textures as the sculpture. And just off camera in all of these things, I think it was Kay Morris at the time, had her archival archivist gloves, that had the little nubs on them, and she was hoping something didn't drop. Well, I can proudly say that no antiquities were hurt in the making of these photographs. As far as the vase with the tulips, every one of those stems was wrapped in saran or something like that to keep it from touching the vase. But we had a great time. It was shot, obviously, with the nudes after hours. The staff loved it, I think, all the good naked bodies running around the museum. And we have a couple waving in the back who were here at the time, I think. Andy Moss may have been out of town when some of that happened. But for 5 nights, we had a shoot in the basement of the museum, and it was great fun. 70 different images came from that shoot. And those images are now in museums in different places, and I've been delighted to live with a few of them in my home. But what we were trying to do was to make the antiquities current and recontextualize them, give them a new concept, a new meaning, a new context, a new connection to live bodies as well as the ancient bodies. And I think it worked pretty well. I think it's the only time that there's been a protracted shoot of nudes with antiquities in a museum context. Occasionally you'll see a fashion piece, but this was extensive, and it was amazingly creative as he would go from one model to the other.